So King, look, I'm the kindness and owner rep on the ATWG. So I'm also the chair of the ATWG. And so for starting, next slide, please. So I'm gonna give a little overview of the ATWG and also an overview of the T&D research program and plan. And Dean Belinko followed me to give a little overview discussion on the stakeholder engagement piece and also some of the planned 2023 activities. So next slide. So this slide is really a background slide. It's just showing you how we got here. Jason mentioned about the January 22 order. That is where the current ATWG started to come together to submit that plan. But previously, prior to that, there was a predecessor to this existing ATWG. And that group worked on the November 2020 utility T&D investment report itself. Part of that report, the third part of the report was focusing on advanced technology. In that report, there's a discussion on more than just the current initial focus DLR or energy storage or power flow. We'll also discuss about any kind of system tools to help create improved operational situation awareness. We also look at these advanced high temperature, low sec conductors, compact design towers, and also SF6 monitoring and alternatives. So my message there is, even though the initial focus is on right now on DLR and energy storage and PFC, that does not preclude us from looking at other technology further down the road. And the reason we look at these three is actually looking at how can we better use existing transmission system? How can we relieve congestion without building new transmission lines? So that's really the initial focus. But beyond that, the ATWG will be looking at other technology as well. So we did hear comments received from the when the PSC issued during the soliciting comments from the general public, and we try to work those comments into our program as well on the stakeholder engagement, which we'll get to a little later. Next slide. So this is a slide showing the representation on the AWG. As shown, I'm a chair, and also Forrest Moore from Concentric Energy Advisor is the secretary there. The ATWG consists of currently of the IOUs. You have the Power Authority and grid operators, and you got the New York State entity, the DPS and NYSERDA, and you also have consultants here. If you read the report earlier years, we didn't have Brookhaven National Lab. So we have invited Brookhaven National Lab in during early this year. And that just shows you the group is a little organic. So we do grow. So there could be opportunity down the road. There could be increased membership. The structure of the group right now is ATWG. We'll also have the opportunity to create task forces or subcommittees. And depending on what the opportunity comes up, we will create those. For example, task force, right? Task force is specifically to create, to look at specific technologies, what are some of the barriers, and what are some of the R&D questions. And there we established 3 task forces. You'll hear from them a little later. One is on PFC, DLR, and also energy storage itself. We haven't formed any subcommittee. Subcommittee are really dedicated to look at maybe more specific topics, some issues that long-running, continuous. That's more like a standing type of committee, but we haven't got to that point at this point yet. So we don't see a need yet, but if need arises, we will do that as well. On how decisions are made on the governance side, and the way the group is structured, we try to reach decision through consensus. If we don't have any consensus, I would dedicate time and we work through consensus itself. And the consensus is reached when no one raises a hand to object. That's when how consensus is reached. So that's how we make that for decision. So and also on membership. So you see the IOUs, we have both a primary rep and a secondary rep. So we have usually two reps themselves. And the roles of the reps actually inform their own leadership back at their own entity if case anything need to be decided. Like for example, when we sign off on the report, itself, right? So each of the members is supposed to get buy-off at their own executive level at the company for that. And, okay, I think I'm pretty much done with this slide. Next one.
Folks on the phone, can you just please make sure you mute yourself?
All right, so one of the charts of the ATTWG is actually how do we vet technologies? How do we screen for them? How do we identify what are beneficial for us? So in our research plan, we lay out generally a process consists of generally three different stages. The first stage is think of it casting a wide net. If you look at different technology, you want to cast a wide net, look at what they are. It's more of a screening stage at that time. You look at what the attributes are, what can it provide, where is it on the commercial scale, how technology ready is it, are there drawback, any barrier, any constraint that prevent you from implementing it. So through this wide net approach, stage one, we're trying to distill this down to identify what are some of the 2 or 3 most promising ones, and let's do a little more deeper dive. You might want to expose those to more rigorous testing, simulation. Anything you put in the product, you want to understand how does it work, what's its operating limit, what can it withstand, can it age? If you could do some aging testing. So you want to have some idea how those equipment product perform. After that is done, the next stage is identify where can best on the system are the greatest value to the system that you want to locate. And their intent there for stage 3 is actually work closely through the coordinate, the CGPP, the coordinate grid planning process itself. And I guess, like I say, anything location, what's the best value for that for stage 3? Next slide. So this one goes a little more detail on the stage 1, stage 2 itself. In stage 1 is really a surveying. Some of the question you sort of begin to ask. That when we said this process, the initial focus is on grid enhancing technologies. So if the need comes to building like new lines itself, compact tile design, that's going to be a little bit later, but current focus is going to be on these grid enhancing technologies. So these are some of the questions we would look at. How can we improve, alleviate transmission bottleneck? How can we improve deliverability of renewable power onto the system? And for the screening, what are some of the criteria that we will screen through? Commercial maturity, where has it been utilized? Who has it used it? What kind of performance have we seen so far? And what are technology readiness level? Technology readiness level is defined definition by DOE, and NYSERDA uses the TLL as well. Grid services, what kind of grid service can provide? Voltage support, I mean, what kind of ancillary service can provide? What are the costs? How's it compared to traditional solutions? What are constraints? Any kind of drawback, anything that I should be worried about when I install these? And then you begin to identify what are the 2 or 3 products we want to now go into really detailed, rigorous testing itself. And there you can look at, for example, we can look at NYPA Agile Lab as a way to do, say, hardware in loop kind of testing, just to test it out itself. If EPRI has labs too, we could look at that as well. You want to look at what the range of performance, how does it perform a different operating condition, how does it age with different weather, so how do you simulate the aging itself? Next slide. And then we get to where this on the system is most beneficial. Here you get a little bit more on system modeling. Things that you can look at, where can we best alleviate congestion? What are the key interfaces? What are some of the opportunity for on-ramping, like you want to say minimize renewable curtailment? Where does it, on the low entity side, that energy storage can be most beneficial, for example? And once you identify that, then you look at if I implement the solution, you're gonna probably have high transfer capabilities. And there you sort of run through your model. It could be production cost modeling, load flow, could be resource adequacy, and how do you, what kind of value you get out of that. And there, there's a need to coordinate with CGPP. So it's very important whatever CGPP is doing with their database, our database, whatever kind of study has to be aligned, be consistent. So that's where the connection comes in. And if the CGPP has 6 different process points, and most likely we'll coordinate them, connect with them at the stage 3 where they do local assessment. They look at non-wise kind of alternatives, look at advanced technology. So that's probably where the coordination be made. Next slide. So this is summary and an active and overview of the research plan. You have 4 different types and an example. On the program support, we have administrative kind of reporting. I just ran through the technology scouting assessment for beneficial technology. And along the way, what kind of guidance documentation I would develop for my T&D planner? I mean, how do we help the T&D planner do the CGPP process? So there are also opportunity, I think, when we talk about energy storage later, what are some of the tools that we need to help us better evaluate, for example, energy storage? Do we need to develop those tools, improve those tools? We can do system modeling when we try to quantify the value of where these technology, when you, as far as we implement within the state, is on the system itself. Laboratory testing, agile, I mentioned before, it could be EPRI testing, how you do your rigorous testing of these different technologies and products as we vet them out. And some a little longer term on demonstration projects. We started a couple examples here. These are more of a long duration energy storage. As the system evolve, as you have peak of retirement, you have more renewable power coming in. As you begin to electrify the heating load, and once the peak demand goes to the winter time, you don't have as much solar then. You probably need more longer term storage. And you can look at long term storage could be 100+ hours, even seasonal. The storages probably need to withstand scenario that you might have a weather event for a long period without sun and wind, right? So you need those long durations to cover those period of time, especially winter time. If you find your solar panel being covered with snow, so those are really the opportunity for long duration storage. We listed some of the dollars. NYSERDA will help fund some of these projects and some of these costs here. You can find all this in the T&D research plan itself. Next slide.
Okay.
So now let's hand over for Dean.
All right. My name is Dean Berlin from National Grid. Thank you, King. Looking forward to, as part of the mandate of the ATWG, we have a number of stakeholder engagement platforms in which we're able to share information and have opportunities for collaboration between the joint utilities, including NYSO and NYSERDA and DPS and others. These venues include regular meetings, which we hold on a weekly basis, where the entire team comes together to share issues in terms of putting together this technical conference, putting together the final report, and putting together interim messaging out to our internal stakeholders. We also have specific task force meetings that focus on key technology areas. We're going to talk about this in the later part of the conference day, but these include energy storage, dynamic line rating, and power flow control. We've hosted a number of technical sessions where we've invited guest speakers to come and speak to the organization. And we're also going to be publishing the results of our discussions on the Joint Utilities Internet website. This is going to be happening, including this technical conference material, and others will be published thereafter. It also provides an opportunity for collaboration where we invite SMEs from the various utilities to speak about their pilot projects and their experience in deploying the technologies that we're interested in, and speaking closely with our colleagues at NYSERDA and the funding opportunities from DOE to understand what are the appropriate responses for these funding opportunities. And of course, there's engagements between ATWG members outside of the ATWG framework. So this provides a launching platform for us to talk about technology areas that are between different utilities that are of common interests. Next slide, please. As King says, we continue to align with the CGP working group. Some of the main activities going forward into 2023, including initiating and putting out T&D energy storage potential. This is going to look at potential for energy storage within the New York area. Development of a common set of transmission and distribution planning tools for organizing this, and development of an economic analysis methodology, which will be published in the final report. As we've spoken before, we've initiated task force around energy storage, power flow control, which each plan to produce a detailed work plan by Q2 of this year. And of course, we're holding today's technical conference with our ATWG members, as well as inviting external stakeholders. So if there's any questions from the audience or on the phone.
Are there any questions in the room for either King or Dean?
Zach Knopf from Greenberg Trowers. Going back to the 2020 order and the report that predated the establishment of the ATWG by the commission, there was a recommendation to evaluate other technologies, including compact tower design. You mentioned that a little bit in your presentation. What work has the ATWG done to look at those technologies, including compact tower design? What is the plan going forward to evaluate those technologies?
Well, back in the 2020 report, there was a whole discussion that we had, actually EPRI came in and did a 500-page report for us along those lines, right? on each of these technologies. So there was an evaluation of the technology itself. As far as when this group's going to take this up, it's going to be after when we're done with PFC and the DLR and the energy storage. As I mentioned before, it doesn't mean we're not going to look at it. That's going to be looking at from a point of view if you add more transmission lines, how we could, I guess, make better use of the land itself, right? The right-of-ways, how we improve those. So those are something that we would also look at down the road itself, but not at this point.
Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Dave Rupert with Transource. King, I got a question for you. I understand your process that you wanted to go ahead and get some things that you could use on, or technology that you use today on the lines. I see in the process you've got ways that you're going to vet and then move it on to phase 2 and move it on to testing and so forth. Given that compact line design and advanced conductors have already been tested and proven, and actually EPRI did 6 years worth of testing on the breakthrough overhead line design at their Lennox facility, wouldn't it make sense to go ahead and move those technologies forward in advance of having to study them, since that's already been done and proven?
The 3-stage process is really a guidance, how you look at it. If things like that's a little bit more commercially mature, it's already done itself, you don't need to do those kind of as much as rigorous testing. Like, and you're absolutely right there. I mean, if the need comes in, we could look at the uses with how it's being performed elsewhere, and those could be opportunity as well. So the 3 stages, not hard and fast, but you can skip some of those steps if some of those technology and products are already widely used elsewhere itself. So, yeah.
This is Liz Grisaro with DPS. I just want to add a note on that question, which is I think the commission encouraged the ATWG to have a flexible process and to not unnecessarily to add study cycles when, in their judgment, the existing information on a particular technology is sufficient to move forward on. So I think the commission has kind of given that signal.
Bill?
Bill Acker, New York Best, and I guess a follow-up for Liz and King on that. My understanding on this is that for some technologies like energy storage, there are lots of different applications. So there are some applications that are very mature and some applications that are much less mature. And so, I applaud what's been happening with the task force for energy storage. My understanding would be that some of the more mature versions would already be considered in the coordinated planning process as we go forward here. But I just want to clarify that and make sure sure that's,
Yeah.
what I said is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why what some of the example we show for us for the demonstrations focus more on the long duration one, which is not so mature. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Thank you, Ken.
Forrest, any, as far as people on the phone or
We had
WebEx?
two questions that came in through the chat. The first one is from Carlos Rodriguez. He didn't mention where he was from, but the question was, how can developers and OEMs participate in the ATWG?
Well, I could say that they could just reach out with a little bit contact information, reach out to me or to Forrest, the chair or the secretary, and we can look at potentially put you on the agenda of the future, say, ATW meeting. It could be better fit at some of the task force meeting stuff. So reach out to me or Forrest.
Thanks, King. Second question comes from Maria Illich from MIT Smart Grids. And the question is, could EPRI comment on the type of system modeling done to evaluate potential advanced hardware?
Sure, this is Eva Gardo from EPRI, and I work in the Energy Storage Research Group, which works in companion with several of the other research programs that do different types and levels of modeling. And so we have a subject matter expert advisor onto each of the task force right now that bring their expertise in on modeling, whether it's load flow or power flow. And we have been also providing technical review and reports on some of the aspects of the technologies so that the joint utility members, can understand the state of the research and the technology at this time. So, we have a number of tools that have been developed by EPRI that are being looked into that have been developed because the utilities haven't been able to find them within the commercial space. So we have a transmission hosting capacity tool for energy storage. We have a distributed energy resource value estimation tool for evaluating different distributed energy resources. So those tools are in consideration for use within New York as well as others that are commercially available. But we have research projects specifically with some of the investor-owned utilities and authorities that are applying some of the tools and the analysis. And so there is a greater understanding of how to be able to apply some of the new research and tools to these technologies. Thank you.
Other questions on that?
That's all we had, Jason.
Okay. Liz, do you have them?
Yeah, I do. Could I follow up on those questions? And forgive me if you've already talked about this, but I'm interested to understand how the group, you talk a little bit about casting the net at phase one. So can you talk more about how you will make, will you make outreach to the public? Will you announce, hey, we're starting to, we're opening the window to learn about technologies and proposals? Will that be a public process that technology developers, can get plugged into and follow up? So if there are technologies that would like to be considered in a particular cycle, they can, they know when and how to participate.
I mean, that could be opportune. There are many ways how to approach that. I mean, we could put that on the website itself. I've seen this done through open innovation challenges. If we have a problem, an issue, then we just invite folks to submit solutions. So there are many ways to look at that. At this point, I don't think we have decided any way to do it yet.
Actually, this is Eva Gardo again from EPRI, and the Energy Storage Task Force has a specific activity at the end of May. The New York Battery Energy Storage Technology Consortium, New York BEST, is having their annual Capture the Energy Conference here in Albany. And it's being held actually on one of the days we typically have our biweekly meetings. And so kind of as a way to really get into the industry and understand the activities in New York, the team, participants of that task force are going to be attending New York Best. And so that is, a way, there's an exhibit hall, so there'll be vendors there. So that is a first step in casting that net.
So I'll just remind folks, I think there's some discussion of this point going back to the Brattle report on the power grid study, and perhaps elsewhere on, the need to identify a specific mechanism in the course of the technology review and the overall grid planning process, a specific entry point and mechanism for new technologies to get on the table. And so I would suggest that I'd ask you to think about making that entry point more explicit. I know you have a full plate in your current study cycle, or your current review cycle, but I think it would be helpful to everyone if you could make something more explicit about how technology developers, beyond the key technologies that I know you're working with now, how they can get onto your radar, so to speak.
Okay.
Any other questions, either from the WebEx or in the room?
So I do have some additional questions. As the coordinated grid planning process goes forward right now, based on the ATWG's recommendations, there are only these 3 technologies that are evaluated. Again, that leaves off the table the evaluation of other technologies. You talked about waiting possibly years, as I understand it, to evaluate something like compact tower design. How does the technology working group consider project-specific needs where those technologies may be preferable for implementation or available for implementation now, but not being looked at by the working group? How do you deal with project-specific issues?
So I could give an example. I think the person sitting here, for example, reactive technologies, right? They have a contingent, I guess, award from NYSERDA on system inertia measurement. That is definitely not on our radar, but they reach out to me. So we got them on before the task force, and they presented technology. So they're always the opportunity. So I guess you're absolutely correct. There may be, we need to make it a little more explicit how technology developed to get on a radar screen, besides knowing, say, Mike or myself, and say, we want to get on the ATWG. So we'll try to make that process a little more explicit, yeah.
So just a quick follow-up question on that. Then will the ATWG be making recommendations to expand that list of 3 technologies and make that explicit in ATWG recommendations going forward?
As a matter of fact, after this meeting, we're going to look at what do we want to discuss next. So you're absolutely correct. We are going to expand that list. So we might be looking even at additional task force. Look at other technologies.
Thank you.
I'd also like to make a quick comment. This is Chris Schramm from Avangrid. The goal of the ATWG is really to put more tools in the toolbox of planners, specifically with the CGPP in mind, and getting renewables onto the grid. And the goal is kind of to look at more technologies that are more in their infancy. So things like compact towers and high strength, low weight conductors are already sort of in the toolbox for a lot of planners when they do a CGPP. But I do agree it would make sense to kind of include you in future ATWG meetings.
Any more questions?
Yeah, just one question. Rafael Granja, Accenture Consulting. So as we transform the grid, which is really what's happening, we're talking about individual technologies and fitting in. But is there a master plan? Do you have a group that's looking at it from a master plan perspective to look at design basis changes, Because we talk planning, but planning requires design basis decisions. So is there anything upfront that's helping develop the big picture of what is required? Because when we say we need renewables more integrated into the system, that requires much more than just a technology. That requires a design change based on the way that we're designed right now. So the bigger picture, is there a group that's looking at the transformation that then allows all of these technologies to be integrated? That's really the crux of the challenge.
I don't think this group looked at
Yeah,
design
I
basis.
would say that's kind of more in the
Yeah, yeah.
CGPP process
Okay.
than this group here. You know, this group is looking at specific advanced technologies of feed to help the CGPP process, you know, right? Liz, as far as, you know. what you-
Yeah, I think it should just be explicit. I mean, there's a connection between what the group is proposing and then the stage 3 of the CGPP, which is where solutions are developed. And I think that's an appropriate linkage. So the assessment of technology is directly connected to the larger planning process.
Any other questions before we move on to the next presenters? Hearing none, okay.
All right, thank you. I'm ready. You want me to bring that mic over? I'm using too loud
I was
anyway.
gonna say, you probably want to.
I know that. I grew up in manufacturing. For those who don't know me, I'm Mike Razanowski with NYSERDA's Research and Development Group, the GRID. Some people know us as Smart Grid. So I'm going to start off with a quiz. Who in the room knows, and people already seen this, they can't chime in, what that acronym means? No idea, huh? All right, on to the next slide. This was a CERCO. Back in the dinosaur days, pre-deregulation, we had a statewide research and development group. And it got disbanded during that, end of the 90s. And this ATWG is like the first time formally that we've had a statewide R&D group. So, and this is a little history here. I mean, you'll read an abstract of a person who really was, and I'll explain to it how it actually fed into the building of our Smart Grid program, R&D program at NYSERDA. So Bruce Vardanesh, who, if anybody knows him from NYPA, is a great visionary. This was one of their abstracts on phaser measurement unit devices in 1992. And we finally got done in 2012 in standardizing on PMUs. So it's interesting how this is the first time that it's happened. But, next slide, this is some information for you. It really led to what we developed here in NYSERDA in the 2006-07 timeframe. When we first got together, it was, myself and Mark Torpy, and Mark's dad, Paul, used to work for Con Ed, was on a CERCO back in the day. So between Bruce and Paul, they kind of bugged me and Mark and say, you guys ought to get into this R&D space in New York because there's a vacuum here. And we kind of saw, this was for 2006, we kind of saw what was coming together. And it was what I could call the 3 C's. You had communication, computation, and controls for the first time coming together in the utility industry. And you see now, right now we have computers that can solve circuits in real time almost, because it's just a big math problem. We have fiber optics and things like that can do the communication at the speed of light. Same thing with electricity, right? And the controls now, you think about all the ADMSs, you think about everything now has a chip in it, right? So you have the smart devices all finally coming together. So as you look at our utilities now, 17 plus years later, you can see them on that exponential technology change curve. And I think it's really an exciting time, to be honest with you. So when we developed the program back in 2006 and 7, it was based on, inspiration from a CERCO, but looking to the future and seeing this change happening and saying, how can we allow these things to be developed? So that's what created what initially we called the Electric Power Transmission and Distribution Research and Development Program, which is a mouthful.
and eventually became known as our Smart Grid program. So along those lines, we're starting to break over 200 projects in the grid program here from 2006-07 timeframe. And that doesn't even include the 100 microgrid projects we did. And we have right now about 50-ish active projects, which include the 10 or 12 new ones that we just awarded just the beginning of this year, and we're contracting. So you go back and look at the history of this. This allowed us, we did development in all different types of batteries when it came to technologies. We helped install the first flywheel in the country in Steventown in 2011. We helped develop that technology pre our Smart Grid group and our energy storage R&D group. We helped create the 6-second signal that allowed that to happen. And that system is up and running now. We looked at K's, compressed air energy storage out in Watkins Glen. Right now looking at pumped hydro with this company called QuidNet. My partner Chris over there is working on that. And we're also now looking at hydrogen in some projects so there's been a long series of development in the energy storage front that we've been a part of. Then you jump into what's going on in the transmission and sub-transmission, or people like to call local transmission. And we helped install some of the first phaser measurement units, get back to what Bruce was very excited about, which led to ERA awards in that, and just that's off and running. That's fully deployed now, those technologies. We looked at Voltvar optimization on our transmission side. We helped the company in the state develop optical sensors for voltage and current with our utility partners. Very successful company, growing, and looked at FACT devices, which we're doing now with PFCs and DLR. We're right now also working on some of offshore wind analysis and other power electronic companies' developments. So not only are we doing studies and demonstrations, we also do product development. So we're also growing companies in the state that are developing some of these technologies that we're utilizing in our grid. Next slide. Then you jump down into, I think it was around 2012, because our initial focus for the first few years was in transmission. Then around 2012, and with guys like this here, we said, boy, there's a big need in the distribution system. So in 2012, we said, how do we develop these integrated system models? How do we do, these ADMS applications, FLISR, switch order management, CVR. We always knew about CVR, but now we're finally getting the controls in there to help us, pay for all of these things. And now we're jumping into DERMS and other type of forecasting tools around electrification. So all those continue to be supported. So we kind of went into the distribution system around 2012, 13. And now we're still there, but now we're kind of coming back to the transmission system. And then last but not least, the program has supported all the ITWG work since 2016. So there's been couple dozen studies done on how do you ground inverter-based resources? How do we solve GFOV, right? Ground fault overvoltage, or 3VO? Intentional idling. How can we improve our hosting capacity with some of these things? So a lot of that fed to the changes that were going on in the ITWG through this research work. So next slide. So how do we do it? This is how we do it, and we're here to support everything that the state is doing. Since I'm kind of giving a state overview, I'll talk a little bit about NYPA and had discussions with LIPA. We do what we call solicitation processes. So we have really a couple avenues. We have what we call an open solicitation, where organizations can come in, and we just had one close. And that whole open solicitation, which was our PON 4393 here, which was around really all the technologies that we floated, as you see the things up there, and compact tower design was one of them, that we floated to the public and say, out there, who's got a great idea? Bring it to us. We're willing to take a look at it. So this is where we awarded about a dozen projects, and I highlighted what the categories they are in. We typically don't talk about them publicly until we get them all contracted and executed, where we'll do a press release. So that's how we handle it. That's one way how we handle it, and that was developed throughout the beginning of the program. And then the other way we do it is through targeted solicitations. So we offer up a challenge to the public, like we just did with the DLR projects that Chris is going to talk about here in the not too distant future. And how can we solve a specific problem or specific challenge. And we offer it up to the marketplace and have them give us proposals. And then last but not least, and we're doing it with our energy storage potential study, is we have a mini bid process, which allows us to get studies done at a much faster pace. And we have a whole host of companies that fit into this electrical system analysis box that we can offer up that. And that's what we're doing now with our energy storage potential study. So that's the avenue that NYSERDA has developed over 17 years of, refining this process. And so we wanted to utilize this in our first ATWG efforts. We did the very similar thing with the ITWG. When we first launched that in 2016, we launched 2 open solicitations to address those technology areas that were out there. So to answer some people's questions is we do have kind of some of these vehicles that allow us to do this. And then last but not least, even though this has been the first formal group put together, we used to meet informally throughout the year. Every year we'd get together as a group and go over to the technology projects we have going on. It wasn't public so much, but it was informal. And so it's really nice to see us formally kind of take a deeper dive in all of these efforts. Next slide, Jason. So I'm going to talk about some of the 50 projects that we have active now at a high level. A couple sentences here. At the end of the slides, I'll show you exactly where you can go get more information on it. So we're doing a project with DERMS in Central Hudson. This is really looking into how do we utilize DERMS? How do we, coordinate with the PV or energy storage system and create that whole effort around, developing the markets. And now we have FERC 222, and we have other DERMS projects that are out there that are starting to get vetted. DERMS has been a hot technology or hot topic area, and, so we're looking into that. I sat in a conference not too long ago with Accenture, and they asked, how can you separate native load from behind the meter PV? Well, we have a project with this company called Connector, which is mounts a device on the collar of a meter and can actually know what the behind the meter PV and other things are doing, along with the normal load that the building has. So we were deploying, helping Con Ed deploy almost 3,000 of those meters. And they really like them so much that it might become a standard package for them to help with this native load, finding out what about native load. So there's the years that roughly they were going to have this work done. Next slide, Jason. We're also working with this utility company and National Grid around how do we take smart inverters, who become somewhat of a DERMS use case, and utilize their functionality to manage the grid, volt-var optimization or power fact, whatever you need to from a standpoint. This work has also led into some of our smart inverter working group standards that are out there now that are being developed. So you can see where we are in that technology change curve. Things are happening, a very rapid rate. Then recent challenge we did was electrification forecasting, and Siemens and Prosumer Grid have won those awards with Avangrid in their Binghamton and Ithaca areas. Ithaca has been very progressive in electrification. So some of those things to help our utilities deal with different type of electrical forecasting. And then on to the next slide here. So then the last challenge we did was with the dynamic line rating with Avangrid, and Line Vision and WinSim are working on those different technologies, and they've given presentations to the group on their technology, or soon will be. So stay tuned for that. There's 4 lines in the Hornell area that we're trying to see what makes sense for this and fitting this into all the ambient air rating systems, and what needs to happen for hourly ratings of systems can be complicated. So then I'm going to shift from a state perspective, because we're going to go give NYPA, our folks here at NYPA, some props. We have a project now with this Manifold Robotics, which is a drone, and it's putting an EMF sensor on the drone so that the drones can come close to a hot wire and not hit it. Obviously can get pretty dangerous. So utilizing drone technology to help us, and so this company with Manifold, so NYPA has the transmission lines, and we can speak to that. So next slide, Jason. So that's some of the NYSERDA smart grid projects. A couple of 50. We have a group, an energy storage R&D group that's looking into long duration energy storage. They also looking into a bunch of other stuff. And so here's some of the technologies that they're doing. And when people talk long duration energy storage, and I didn't say long term, so you got to save me on that. It's really, some people 8 hours, some people say 10 hours, whatever, but it's something that needs to be longer than what we have today in the applications that we have. So these are some of the technologies that we're looking to, and there's really a natural fit between our smart grid program and our energy storage program. We talk with them a lot, along with our energy storage, we call them the deployment program. So you see some of those here. Next slide. So I'm going to go into some of their projects, and they probably have a good 30 or 40 projects going on right now. So we're looking at some long-term projects, or long duration, energy storage projects. One of them was with Constellation. So how do you use nuclear to create hydrogen for the fuel cell? A lot of people have been having that conversation. So there's one there, and another one with hydrogen, with our energy. So how to use hydrogen in the reversible fuel cell technology, because as you can see, hydrogen is starting to bubble up as some things that might be able to help us accomplish our goals. Next slide. 212 solar. Now we're into some normal different technologies like zinc, and how to utilize zinc over, lithium ion. Everybody understands the issues with them, around energy storage, and they're great for compact solutions, but we need some other battery technologies for other applications per se. And I know Bill, and we've been working with BEST and everybody else. And so figuring this stuff out as a group is what our research programs are trying to do. So this is the Zen. Next slide. So now I'm going to go into some of the NYPA projects. And if you talk to Alan here, they probably have about 100 of them. So I'm only going to get into a few of those, but there's a project with them which is doing tower sensing on the optical ground wires to see if there's any type of issues with wind or temperature or even vandalism. So there's an example of a project. And then fast vehicle charging, look into a flywheel on that. And flywheels are great for high speed stuff that we figured out with Beacon. Next slide. Looking at some thermal energy storage. So, folks are looking at, at SUNY Purchase, how can you utilize that to develop, some other different type of energy storage stuff. And King had that on our list of long duration items. And another Zinc 8. So you folks are working with Zinc 8 as our energy storage folks are too. So there's some examples. So next slide, Jason, please. So not only NYPA has been working in their R&D program for a lot of things that we are doing at the state, NYPA has really went out of its way to develop the Agile Lab. And Hussein is the director over there, and they're in the process of building a new phase 2 lab up in the Nano Center here in Albany. So hopefully Hussein should have that up and running in July-ish, right? Right now the build is going on. And to us, and you really got to thank Bruce Fardinesh for this vision too. Back in 2012, we started having this conversation around these new tools that we're going to need to help us do evaluation on things. So that's where NYPA has stepped up and created that. So all the tools that are happening, and you can see all the modeling tools that they have, whether it's PSSE, and then all the type of real-time stuff they can do with their RTDS or Opal RT simulators. And then you start, throwing in production cost modeling tool that they have. They use GE Maps, and we're going to start utilizing them in some of our other projects. So, next slide, Jason. So if you look at all the use cases that Agile has, it's just mind-boggling. But I see no one in the country that has this tool set that is specifically dedicated to solve New York problems. And I'll give you an example. We did some offshore wind analysis. And what we did was model the entire 9 gigawatt system, working with Ørsted and Equinor to help build that, and ran that in Opal RT. Meanwhile, we ran the entire power grid in RTDS. So we brought those pieces together. And I'm not sure, as we start looking at IBERs and all the impacts of inverter-based resources, EMT modeling becomes extremely important around your analysis work and things that you need to do. So not only do we have the tools set up at Agile, but we also have the models set up at Agile. So whenever we have researchers come into the state in their project, and we're doing that with a project we have with Ava and energy storage, and another one we're doing to help look at building, a model of the DC offshore mesh, because we've standardized on 320 kV DC, that those things will be built and they'll be utilized so that we can all figure out together what type of impacts this has, not only in our system, but throughout the state system. Next slide. So that's at the high level. I reached out to LIPA to see if they had any other R&D projects, and they didn't find any for me. So hopefully if LIPA finds a few, I would explain what they're doing too. But I want to thank NIPA for giving me their information. Hopefully I did it justice. So here's what we're planning for 2023 and on. Obviously, we're going to continue supporting our groups, which we have, in the 17 plus years that I've been doing this. The interconnection group, interconnection technical group, even our market development group, which my partner Chris is a part of. Obviously, CGPP, all of our task force. We also continue to support all of our organizations that are in the state, our national lab and the national labs throughout the country. We have 10 plus universities in the state that we have done research projects with that are playing in this space, and we continue to work with them, and our special research organizations like EPRI, et cetera. And we cannot forget our ISO. ISO is something we've always been part of. And obviously our investor-owned utilities, our munis and co-ops who we've done projects with. What we're also doing is pursuing DOE funding. Right now, there's a lot of efforts going on around a whole host of efforts. Nothing's been, for a better term, awarded yet, outside of some BIL awards for resiliency for some of our munis. You can find that information on our website, and we continue to support what's going on in NIPA Agile. So with that being said, any other questions around what we're looking at here from a state or NYSERDA perspective?
Yeah, I just want to point out, I'm Alan Etlinger from the Power Authority. I just want to point out, I think there's, as Mike pointed out, we've got a bunch of utilities here who are doing a lot of research on their own. Okay, so it's not only the working group that's doing, and I think when we find a research project that's applicable to what the ATWG is doing, we feed that into the group. So it's more than just what you're seeing here on the table. It's everybody's looking at advanced technologies and new ways and better ways to do things. I think one of the things that, and I'll close with this, that our former CEO said when the CLCPA came out, is the technology does not exist today to get to where we want to get to the goals. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, we've been using the ATWG also as a tech transfer forum, which has been hopefully great to get everybody level set and everybody could understand what we're all doing, because we're all going to move this together. And so in turn, we don't want to duplicate it. I've given up some websites here where you can go find all our ITWG reports that we support. We have our APTD reports on our website. We have, where you can find a paragraph under our research project updates, and where you can find more information on the grid program, or even some of that BIL stuff that's happening in our program. But this has been to me a wonderful setup and a wonderful venue for us to really start accelerating some of this effort. So that, with any questions?
Are there any questions in the room for Mike?
I have one, but I'll hold it.
Oh,
Because we have a.
Boris,
We have one question from Maria Illich from the chat, Mike, and her question is, what is your cooperation within New York between NYSERDA and neighboring utilities and universities? Maybe you can talk a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, granted, when we say neighboring utilities, we work with National Grid, who's right across the way, and Avangrid, which is Central Maine Power. We've done some work with folks up there. And when it comes to universities, we've worked with Georgia Tech, and a whole host of others just outside of the state too. So that has not been off limits for us from a standpoint of projects, because whenever we look at people who partner on projects, we just look at the team themselves, not really where they're from. But we've always been wanting to support the New York State universities, building the knowledge base in-house. When I graduated from electric power program at RPI in the late 80s, they disbanded that program in the mid 90s. And now I see a lot of them coming back. So now we're trying to build those power engineers that are solving problems, not only in the state, but around the country, he'll hopefully come here and work for our utilities someday, because that new technology, that new knowledge is changed immensely since I went to school. And so we coordinate with a whole bunch of national labs and a whole bunch of, I've worked on mass CEC councils reviews. I worked on California CEC council reviews, and people from every state coming in, and every country almost coming in and talk to us about all of this stuff. So try to coordinate it.
Thanks, Jason. That's all.
That's what I want to, okay. Liz?
Liz?
Yeah, so, that's all really interesting, and I don't spend a lot of time in this space, so thanks for that overview.
Yeah, that's what I tried to do.
Here's kind of, at least, a possible challenge, which is, how do we leverage this advanced technology working group so that it is focusing, so that all of those other efforts at least inform the choices that the advanced technology working group makes in terms of what technologies it kind of puts on the table for, for future utility deployment? Like, how do we make sure, it seems to me that that's one potential value the advanced technology working group could have. And so have you given any thought to that?
You want my personal opinion on that?
What personal, whatever, official?
I'll tell you what we've tried to do, and I'm hoping that, we take some of what we've learned and share it with everybody, because we've been doing this for a while, is when you talk about new technologies, what you always have to be careful of, if it's not economical, it's not repeatable. All right? So when we do a project, it's not just around the technical solution. It's around the business case, right? Why are you doing this? Because the best technology is not what wins. It's the best application. It's the best business case. So from a standpoint of how do we educate the, GCP or whoever, is I think not only do we have to give them the tools and the potential technology that can be an alternative to what they're initially planning, and hopefully it's much more cost effective, right? But not only that, we give them the business case as to how much does this cost, how much does it cost to run, how much does it cost to maintain, how much does it cost to install, what type of additional benefits in it, because some of these technologies, also are part of an upgrade of a transmission line. They become a complementary piece and allows that to move that. So it's, in my mind, Liz, it's how do you develop that business case solution that plugs in the technology along with the economics that you need to make it happen.
But isn't there I seem to recall from the group's first filing that there's a step in the ATWG process for looking at the economics and the business case for a particular application, so you're parallel there in
Yeah, we
considering that.
even on the casting wide net, that's more of a desktop exercise. So
Sure.
you need to look at the economics, at least the unit cost, like the what's it cost to produce that megawatt of service compared to the traditional line. So there at least a screening process at the very beginning.
So do you feel, and again, I apologize because this is not the area that I work in day to day, and you do you feel that the group can, is plugged into and can take advantage in that net casting of all this other research that's going on? I mean, I hear about it and I think, oh my goodness, do we have a whole bunch of silos?
I
And-
think
Hoping we
so.
don't.
At least on the individual, say, task for DLC, BFCES, like they do deep dive into different technology, different vendors,
Okay.
different products.
Okay.
At the higher level, ATW will begin to think what other technology categories we should be looking into. And we need to establish task force to go deep dive in those as well.
So as things that are maybe going on at NIPA or at things that are being looked at elsewhere, as they kind of start to look promising, you guys can take note of them.
Right.
Okay.
Create a task force maybe and take a deep dive on it. And then if it leads to a pilot, make sure that not only we prove out the technology, but we prove out the business case on it. At the end of the day, that needs to happen.
And I'll harp on this again. Another important part of the ATWG is how to take those pilot programs and actually standardize the way we model them
Exactly, scale them.
with each utilities. So we're doing it consistently.
Yeah.
Con Ed's not studying energy storage, completely different how Rochester Gas and Electric.
Yeah.
And to standardize the valuation
also.
Yeah, well, it's part of the work you're doing.
I'm Jack Joyce with Reactive Technologies. I've worked with NIPA and EPRI over the years. I've been in New York. One thing about the collaboration that you have going on now over the last 20 years, NYSERDA is a great pivot point. You ask public, how would we make this public? They are your public advertisement to bring in new technology. I got in through them with our advanced technologies and submitted it to a pond. And one of their contingencies was, I got to get some of these other utilities involved.
Right.
And make sure that you're collaborative. So, and then this working group is feeding off of that. And as Ken pointed out, they're feeding into that, into the pond. So I think you got the public sector procurement aspect of it there through NYSERDA. This working group is actually bringing in utilities that combine and come together to collectively have a voice. They're doing each individual things themselves. And again, running through that, the only recommendation I would have, funding is crazy these days. All right, we have state funding, which is great, but now you talk about the IIJA, the IRA. How do you help apply to get to the New York goals better than you have before in the past? That's going to be a challenge. But just some thoughts and observations I'd like to share, and I appreciate.
Yeah, we're trying to do that in the efforts we have here. We actually talk about, projects that everybody's going after here, and we'll see what we win. I mean, that's always the key. But we did go through this exercise at ERA. When we did the ERA Awards back in 2009, we had a whole statewide effort on it. And then what we won, we shared. And O'Connor got a big distribution automation award. And it did a lot of stuff. We had them at our informal meetings explaining all of it. Kind of DA has gone from a pilot to total deployment, just like PMUs have. So I think can we always get better? We can always get better. So we're trying to do that. But I think being transparent, trying to share knowledge as much as possible, trying to, have as much collaboration as possible, this has always been our mindset and what we've tried to move forward.
So let me ask my mind works in a process sense. That's
Doesn't
what I
mine.
bring to the table.
Mine is too.
So as we're thinking about, aligning all these things, CGPP and ATWG and your ongoing ponds, and thinking about how to line all this stuff up, would it make sense, to sort of establish a hierarchy in a formal way and say, technologies that have received at least some level of exploration from NYSERDA, are sort of eligible to go the next step, which might be to ATWG. Would it make sense to kind of create and publicize, hey, we have a process in New York State and it starts from stuff that's in the garage, to stuff that's kind of bench lab ready, to stuff that's been field tested twice, to stuff that,
You're ready to
utilities
deploy.
are looking at as seriously as potential applications. Should we try to pull all these things together?
I think that the ATWG is the perfect forum for that. From NYSERDA's perspective, when we do product development projects, we take them we discuss TRLs. So we use DOE's TRL. So you go from TRL 1, which is just a basic idea, to a 9, which is fully commercialized deployment. But we also look at CRL, which is commercialized readiness level, and take them through the same exercise. Now, historically, what we've done, Liz, is NYSERDA was really more of what we called applied research, where we would take things in a TRL level 5, 6, and bring them to a 9. The 1 through 3, 4, 5s, we would leave to the national labs, the ARPA-Es, and we watch them. Right. And so I think the ATWG is perfect for following that. So, I mean, there's a technology we brought in to the state that started at basic research at Michigan Tech, right, or Michigan State, and came through ARPA-E to develop their technology. And when they move it along that TRL cycle, we need to be ready to say, hey, we're ready to apply that technology in New York State and solve this problem. That's what we've kind of felt. So from NYSERDA's perspective, we felt we were of the applied research, and we left the basic research to the labs, to the ARPA-Es of the world, NRELs. And as they brought something down the path, we would think, hey, we can apply this and solve a problem in New York State. So I think it's our foray to follow everything that can help us solve our problems along that path.
Is that structure, how do technology developers feel about that?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Bill Acker from New York Fest. So first of all, NYSERDA has done a phenomenal job over the years of cultivating and maturing technologies in the state. And so I think Mike's correct. There is already a process, and I think it works pretty effectively from a developer's perspective. I would be very careful, though. We had a lot of conversation about other technologies in the ATWG earlier in the day here. And so I would be very careful not to be so rigid that everything has to go through every step in every process, because there are different maturities and everything. There's things that will just be missed. And so we want to use it as a guidance system and use it as a very structured system that helps us flow things through. But we don't want to be a requirement that thou shalt go through this step to get to the next step. Because there are different types of technologies and different types of things around that. But I do think from a developer's perspective, there's a lot of support for what NYSERDA has done, and the tying it together with ATWG that you're starting to do now, I think is very, very effective.
I just want to keep us all on time. We are a little bit over on our talking points here, so we're all comfortable with extending into our break. That's all right, but I just want to make sure we.
Yeah, I'll just, we had a 15-minute break set up, and we can ask people in the room if we want to shorten that, or we can, allow more Q&A, leave it up to the group. Are there any more questions right now for this group, for this presentation, or Mike, or anybody else? Nothing on it. Okay. So do we want to do is a 5-minute break good for people then? Right now?
5 minutes sounds good.
Okay, so folks on the phone, we're gonna do a 5-minute break and start back up at about 11:20 for the next presentation.
I do you well.
All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to start back up. We're going to move to the Energy Storage Task Force, and Chris Sham from Avangrid is going to take over.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Schramm. I'm a senior transition planning engineer from Avangrid. I work in our department called Strategic Planning, and we're involved in a lot of the renewable initiatives in New York. And I'm going to talk today about the Energy Storage Task Force that was initiated late last year. And I'm going to go into what we've done so far, sort of what we're working on now, and what our future plans for the task force are. So right now, the STF, it's made up of 10 member organizations, including all of the investor-owned utilities, as well as LIPA, NYSERDA, EPRI, New York Best, and most recently, Brookhaven National Lab has joined us. So our goal as a task force is to determine the potential for energy storage to support specifically transmission and distribution systems and to unbottle renewable energy to help meet the state's CLCPA 2030 and 2040 goals. So those are the 70% renewable by 2030, 100% emissions free by 2040. And so to do this with energy storage, we're going to explore different technologies, use cases, and benefits that we can see from different energy storage technologies. And very importantly, as I've mentioned a couple times, is to make recommendations to utilities and other stakeholders on the best way to use different technologies and deploy them for specific use cases. Next slide, please. So this slide here kind of shows how our task force is kind of lining up with the 3-stage technology evaluation process that King introduced earlier. So that's the technology survey and screening, the economic assessment, and then the actual specific deployment of different technology in different locations. Thank you. So again, as I mentioned, last year when we got together, we got some presentations and discussions to review existing technologies of energy storage within the state and elsewhere. And we actually sent out a survey to all of the different utilities to kind of see what they're piloting, what they're planning to use, and very importantly, the actual challenges that they've seen when it comes to implementing energy storage on a wide scale to address these transmission and distribution needs that we're seeing. Then at that time, we also put together a list of use cases that we kind of feel might be a good fit for this task force to kind of work ourselves into the coordinated grid planning process as a whole. So, after we did that initial work, we actually right now are working on a energy storage potential RFP. So the plan is for that to be, put out, I believe, next week. So around there, so we're doing a lot of good work with that. And then for the rest of this year, in parallel with that RFP, we're going to start looking at putting together some unified planning guidelines, as well as, an economic model that all the utilities are going to basically follow, or hopefully follow as best as possible, when actually using energy storage as a non-wire alternative to traditional solutions. Going even further into that stage 3 here, identifying locations, deployment, we're hoping to kind of get to that stage in late 2023 and then into 2024 to line up with our coordinated grid planning process. We're actually going to provide specific recommendations for optimal technology deployment based on our RFP and other assessments that we look at in studies. So next slide. So early on, when this task force was formed, we kind of sat down and put together 3 work streams that we're going to work on right away. So the one circled in red here is our transmission and distribution potential study RFP. This is a little bit different than other energy storage studies that have been done in the past, which are more focused, or often focused more on market forces and buying and selling power rather than specifically addressing transmission and distribution needs. So our hope for this RFP is to kind of explore that and look at more stacked benefits and multi-use systems of energy storage. And as a final deliverable of this RFP, we're kind of hoping to see estimated the capacity potential for each of the identified use cases within this proposal. So once this RFP is released, in parallel, we're going to begin in the second box developing a unified planning guideline, as well as standardizing an analysis method, an economic analysis methodology for all the New York utilities to follow. You know, it's important to identify best practices as well as the best processes and tools to use when you're actually looking at and modeling energy storage as a tool to address transmission and distribution needs. And so we're going to put together some reasonable assumptions, such as charging and discharging cycles that make sense, and also put together maybe an average cost per kilowatt for different technology types, with the understanding that this could vary depending on the location that the technology is deployed. You know, putting something in downstate is probably going to be more expensive than placing it upstate. So those types of considerations need to be included in this economic analysis methodology. And then, of course, you know, once again, once this is done, we'll be providing all these recommendations and ideas to the planners working in the coordinated grid planning process for use specifically in stage 3 and 4 of that process. Next slide, please. All right, so I'd like to go into a little bit more detail on the T&D storage potential RFP. Again, that's going to be released later or next week, right, Mike? Yep. So it's going to be released next week. So you'll be able to check that out. Mike's laughing over there. So this RFP has 3 main tasks. And the first of which is actually to look at the energy storage landscape, you know, in New York, what's already been done and what's being piloted and contemplated. We want to broaden that out outside of the state of New York and also look at it internationally as well. So we don't want to limit ourselves to what's being done within the states, but we want to look, you know, outside of that and, you know, what's being done in Europe, China, wherever. And then out of that, once that's complete and we have the landscape down, we're actually going to move on to task 2, which is to look at actually distilling that down and putting together a framework for each technology type and use case to be used by the utilities in the state. And then really importantly, this is what makes this a really interesting RFP, is we're going to have the selected contractor who puts together that framework sit down with each utility and try to apply it into each of the unique service areas. So obviously each utility's service area is, you know, pretty different. It's very unique. There's different topologies, load profiles, even different criteria we have to adhere to. So we're going to sit down and try to apply this framework that's put together. And it might need to be tweaked depending on whether it works for one area or another. So it'll be really interesting to see how things vary between operation areas. And, you know, as a final outcome of the stage 3, this will give us a really good idea of the actual storage potential by use case and technology type within each utility's service area and as the New York State as a whole. Go to the next slide, please. All right, I've talked about use cases, you know, but what have we actually sat down and thought about as use cases? So I have a couple of here that I'd like to talk through, but we're kind of thinking that there's 3 main buckets that transmission and distribution energy storage applications fall into. The first here is transmission, which is your high voltage lines, typically networked systems that are, you know, really long distances. And the second here is distribution, which is your lower voltage, often radial system. And unlike transmission, it's serving customers directly. And then the last one is mobile energy storage, which is, you know, can we put a battery on the back of a flatbed truck, move it around and make the grid more flexible in that sort of way. So under transmission, we identified infrastructure investment deferral as a really good, easy first step for using energy storage. So instead of building a new line or reconductoring a line, you know, can we put a battery or some sort of long duration storage at a location to kind of defer those upgrades or even, you know, prevent us from having to do them. In that same vein, we've also thought about using it for renewable energy integration and reduction of curtailment of different renewables by putting a battery in. And then also voltage and frequency support. So, you know, quite frankly, the nature of the grid is changing, right? We're moving from, you know, having centralized generators to spreading them all over the system. And oftentimes those renewable generators are in, you know, for lack of a better word, weaker parts of the system. And due to their intermittence, they can cause voltage and frequency fluctuations. So potentially using battery storage to kind of smooth over those fluctuations can be a really powerful use case that, you know, having it owned by a utility or operated to help the utility is really really a good use case for it. Now, under distribution, you'll see some similar use cases, infrastructure deferral, and also the integration of distributed energy resources. But also we're thinking about things like peak shaving, so placing a battery or some sort of energy storage at a substation or on a feeder of some sort to kind of actually lower the amount of load that the system's seeing at that location during our peak load hours. And also using batteries for distribution resiliency and things like that. Now, in our third bucket here is mobile energy storage, and these are a little bit more novel uses than what you might be used to with energy storage. So the first one here is actually using a temporary battery system to interconnect renewable generation prior to actual more permanent traditional upgrades can go in. So we can actually maybe move a truck in and absorb some of that power that might be causing congestion, actually get useful energy out of a renewable energy plant before we can actually put something more permanent in. We're also outside of renewables, maybe we can use energy storage, mobile energy storage to back up a circuit or a customer load in the event of something like an extended outage due to, a severe weather event or even attack, like, what we saw last year in North Carolina. So that's another interesting use that we've been thinking about. And then lastly, under mobile storage is the temporary offloading of circuits during construction outages. So as I mentioned, the grid's, evolving like crazy right now, and there's going to be a lot of upgrades required. And one constraint that we might run into is actually getting construction outages, right? We can't just take everything out. We need to make sure the customers still get power and it's still reliable. So perhaps using temporary mobile energy storage to sort of offload some circuits can help us construct faster and help integrate renewables in a much easier and quicker way. Next slide, please. So for upcoming work outside of this RFP that I've discussed, we're kind of thinking this is going to start around June 2023. But as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at the Unified Planning Guidelines and Economic Methodology. So again, all utilities we think should be planning energy storage in a very similar fashion and using the same guidelines. The main one of these is going to be, charge and discharge cycles for different technology types. So it might be different for battery versus, maybe something like hydrogen. So that's really important to nail down. And also change those guidelines depending on existing technologies and what we think might come in the future. Because we're planning out 10, 20 years, it's important to kind of think about what we need to do or what we should plan for in the future when it comes to energy storage. So this unified set of rules and economic guidelines is going to be really, really important when we use it for the coordinated grid planning process, especially because of the new rules set around financing these projects. For a project that benefits all New Yorkers in integrating renewables, the way that we're financing that is going to be spread across the state rather than just in the one service territory, at least for the phase 2 projects. So it's really, really important that if we're using this energy storage as a solution to address these needs, we need to make sure that it's tested the same way in Con Ed versus upstate New York in Avangrid and National Grid territory, so that the costs are shared equitably across everybody. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to be leveraging the work obviously done with our RFP, but we're also going to be looking at work done by EPRI and also New York Best, and by looking at the recently released energy storage roadmap. So that concludes my presentation. Any questions, I will be happy to answer them or punt them to someone else that's on the task force.
Quick
Sure.
question, Rafael Granja, Accenture. The use cases that you're alluded to, are those the only use cases, or when you issue the RFP, can the vendor submitting the proposal augment those use cases?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. These are just a couple, but we definitely hope that the vendor, when they actually look at that landscape, they're going to come up with things that we haven't even thought of,
Okay.
which will be really important because we don't know what we don't know, right? So, that's a really big part of the RFP. That's task one of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dave Hooper of Transource, this interesting process that you're looking at. I'm curious on the transmission side, are you anticipating possibly using any of the storage devices as power flow control as well? And so how would you model that?
Yeah, so that is something we talked about, power flow control using energy storage. So that would be absorbing energy during like a light load, high renewable output period, and then outputting it during a peak load, low renewable period. That is something we've thought about. The difficulty in modeling that and making sure that we're not overlooking something, that's something we're going to have to talk through with the task force and standardize on as utilities. And I'm sure EPRI has done some good work on figuring that out as well.
Any more questions in the room? Forrest, anything on?
We had one question in the chat, and that was, who's going to issue the RFP? And I just replied, it would be NYSERDA.
Yeah, through a mini bid process with, electrical system analysis contractors. It's on our website.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Next, we're gonna go to dynamic load ratings and Ruby and Peter.
Hi, my name is Ruby Chan, and I'll be covering the dynamic line ratings today. Next slide, please. Pete and I are going to be leading the task force. The task force mission is to identify and reduce barriers to deploy DLR, bottle renewable generation to meet New York statewide CLCPA policy goals. And for 2023, our goals is to review industry practices for implementing DLR technologies, develop guidelines for cost-effective applications of DLR technologies in New York. Right now, we have static ratings. FERC AA1 will cover the seasonal ratings and ambient adjusted ratings. The task force will look into the dynamic ratings. Next slide, please. Here's our work plan for the next 18 months. We broke it up into a 3-stage approach. Currently, in the second quarter of 2023, we're learning more about DLR by sharing presentations on DLR technology, organize use cases, and develop working definitions for DLR technology. For the second half of 2023, we're going to review and build from existing assessments and evaluations, development of DLR ratings methodologies, evaluate coordination with AAR and incremental benefits, and in 2024, we plan to provide recommendations for technology deployment based on surveys and assessments. Next slide, please. Several New York utilities are currently testing DLR technologies already. Avangrid, they're evaluating transmission lines in the New York Southern Tier region. NYPA, they're exploring direct sag measurements with results transmitted to the data center, and additional line vision pilot exploring congestion challenges. National Grid will install DLR monitors on 3 different lines with integration of line ratings into the EMS. There are a couple of DLR technologies out there. There's the live line conductor monitoring, weather-based line capability forecasts, LiDAR, and rating forecasting using data processing and analytics. Next slide, please. The task force, we looked into some of the previous work that had already been done. So the line monitoring technology I covered, and there's pilots going on with several utilities already. We have the New York tie line rating. So we already have ratings for static lines. So we're going to see if we could expand it for AAR and DLR. The NYSO is already developing procedures to facilitate voluntary DLR implementations by TOs, consistent with the FERC Order 881. And then we've been looking at EPRI DLR activities, and we're also exploring international DLR pilots that was deployed in Belgium and UK. So we're learning from international as well. Any questions?
Are there any questions in the room for Ruby? Go ahead.
Yeah, Dave Rupert with Transsource. Ruby, I'm curious, technology that you're thinking about, you're looking at wind, temperature, all the components that can affect line rating, correct?
Yes.
And what does the technology look like to be able to monitor that real time, or are you doing it day ahead, 2 days ahead? What's the planned protocol?
We're not sure yet for.
I can comment. We're actually, Avangrid and NYSERDA, we've partnered on a DLR right now up in, she mentioned it, the Southern Tier. We're actually looking at two different types of technology, and that's, I believe it's a 5-minute interval or something with the technology. We have two different types that we're looking at. One of them is the Line Visions device, which is actually, it's a LiDAR that's going to be mounted on the tower itself and actually monitor the line temperature as well as take in inputs in the SAG and take in inputs like ambient air and the actual like weather data. And another one we're looking at is actually not going to be LiDAR at all. It's actually just going to be modeling the wind and the way that affects it's like a fluid dynamics software that's going to be honoring the wind at select towers and actually calculating what the expected rating of the conductor is going to be based on the fluid dynamics of the wind, solar radiation and things like that. And we're actually putting these two types of devices on the same corridor, and we'll be able to really compare and contrast which ones perform better or what challenges are for some of them.
And so you're getting that information, so that'll allow you to theoretically change if you've got the right control systems on that line to be able to damp control or push more power through it, assuming you have the.
Yeah, so the reason that DLR is kind of like starting to take off now is it potentially it can really help with helping congestion, especially with wind, because what's increasing your ratings the most is the amount of wind that's actually hitting your conductor. So in high wind day, and if you have DLR, it might actually allow you to push more power without curtailing the actual wind units.
Yeah. So from an ISO standpoint, how are they able to model this so that they know that tomorrow there should be more capacity on this line, so therefore I shouldn't see congestion? And then what happens if it doesn't occur and suddenly you've got a line that you didn't get the weather that you thought, but the day ahead planning had shown there was going to be ample capacity on that line?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the challenges, with this DLR technology when you're planning. You can't predict the weather usually. I don't know if Mike, how NICE is going to be handling this as it gets implemented more.
To answer that question, I think.
Actually, I'm from the ISO.
Yeah,
so maybe
Andrew
address that.
gave us a presentation on what they're doing.
Yeah, so it's in the very final stages right now of what we presented to stakeholders, what our, proposal kind of is going forward. If you guys want that presentation, I think we can take that back as a to-do item for a question.
But to answer your question too, is ISO has a plan to go to ambient rating because of FERC Order 881. Well, that's an hourly profile of your, line. So all that has to happen too. So it's all going in concert together, and the calculations need to happen in real time now instead of just off in an engineering sheet and changed, seasonally. So that's all a work in progress that I think if you look at the AAR timeline, the middle of June of 2026 is when it all needs to be implemented roughly from FERC to FERC order, give or take a day. We know that can always change, but that's all is happening in real time. So stay tuned.
The Power Authority is also working on something. We're actually installing weather stations on some of our transmission towers, local weather stations.
Yeah.
Because a lot of especially the Mesonet from the University of Albany, about 128 stations, but as it would be not next to the transmission line to actually get the real live data. But as was pointed out, the goal is really to get the ambient line rating to really, get a handle on how much power we can put through the line.
Yeah, and FERC has a docket on DLR too. So they're looking at that next stage. So stay tuned. A lot of work in progress.
And does the team or does the group have a sense of what the additional power capacity would be by going to this?
That's really why we're piloting it. There's so many factors, like even like the direction the line's going can matter. So, you know, that's why we're sort of piloting the technology now and doing different types of
How your
technology.
wind will impact the thermal capability of the conductor.
That's all it comes down to.
And it's gonna
That's where the
change-
math is.
And
Changing
temperature,
tower to
there's a
tower,
lot of
so-
variables.
Is there another question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it's Joe Russell with in-house model. So we manufacture a DLR technology. It's a little bit different than some ones you're piloting. Our sensors are right on the line. You have to take vibrations off the line, so you get accurate wind monitoring right on the transmission span itself. A little bit different than some of the other ones we're using, some of the local weather data, wind information, especially for spans that are shaded by trees and those sort of things. You get wind on an open field versus wind in between, where there's big pine trees, right? So our device on the line monitors the wind, the sag directly right there on the line. And it provides, typically, you're seeing that 20 to 40% type of gain thing. And then there is forecasting day ahead, 5 day ahead, based on traditional, historical values. And then the DLR also in our device, we default to AAR when the DLR information is not available. So this will be the best of both worlds.
Liz?
I just had a question, or maybe it's more of a comment on timing. Assuming CGPP gets underway this year, they'll be approaching, you'll be in the solution development and evaluation phase. It'll be about a year. So sometime in spring or so of '24. Will this team be able to make some recommendations on DLR in that timeframe?
We're hoping like a guideline, like when's the best case to use DLR and if it provides the needed benefit.
Okay, so you are trying to dovetail with
Yeah.
that. Okay, so that schedule would work.
We assume that's a continuous process too.
Yeah.
As we improve, we get better.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
No,
And
we love it.
Not one time off. right?
Yeah.
Improvement is great.
Yeah, and that's gonna be really interesting, like, because planning typically, especially 10, 20 years ahead, is we usually look at the worst case scenario, right? So we need to make like some interesting recommendations on, how much can we assume a DLR is gonna improve a line? What situations, if the line is congested due to wind, okay, maybe DLR makes a lot more sense than if it's congested by, I don't know, solar output or something.
Any questions on the phone for us?
Yeah, we had one question from Monique from Brookhaven, I think. And the question was, are these technologies able to help predict the line rating?
I mean, that's basically, my understanding is yes, it's going to, you're gonna be able to predict it based on future weather events.
That's all we've got, Jason.
Anything else in the room?
Zach Nog from Greenberg Trowers. Will the task force be looking at mitigating strategies for some of the downsides that you might anticipate from the DLR technology?
I think, personally, I think that falls back into your traditional solutions, right? Which could be reconductorings, compact conductor, or compact construction, right? Utilizing different methodologies within your right-of-ways and so on. I think this is more of a, I tend, and I'm a distribution guy here, so excuse me, right? I tend to kind of look at this more as a, I hate to use the word quick fix, right, solution, or an interim solution to get us more capacity on bottling, right? Before we can do a traditional longer term, right? And that's where the cost benefit, and I think how you look at reliability of these alternative solutions, if you will, is part of what the task force is looking at in all of the different use cases. So my personal take on that is also probably the floor might be AAR, not DLR. So because that's a FERC requirement. Right. So at the end of the day, we might have to fall back to AAR scenario.
Bill, after New York Best, I think there's also an interesting interplay here potentially between the DLR and the energy storage applications. There's one of the key energy storage applications on the transmission side is N-1 contingency relief. So if you have a large energy storage system that can be relatively short duration, could be sitting there providing N-1 contingency relief. If you had DLR going on there to adjust that line at the same time, you would suddenly have a variation in the N-1 contingency relief from the energy storage, and that energy storage could then be released to the market. So you could mitigate some of the DLR risk by combining it with energy storage, which I think is a fascinating approach to think about.
So, Bill, all these enhancing technologies need to work together. At least we'll hear one in another second between PFCs, DLR, and anything you're doing at that level that can either move power, give you a little more here, save something. That all has to work in a concert, right? So it's complicated, but it's the things that we're working on to see what it's going to take to get done.
And the other challenge I see is that this could help from the transmission operation, but if you talk about long-term planning, what we're looking at. So there is that, what are we looking at here? Are we looking to operate the grid the next day? Or are we looking to plan the grid for the next 20, 30 years? Thank you.
Oh,
Okay, great. Any?
At once.
Anything else from within the room? Or we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, that can't happen.
Okay, great. So we'll be going to the power flow control. Back to Chris.
Yeah, so this is going to be a much shorter little presentation here. This Power Flow Control Task Force is sort of in its infancy. We just started it early last year, so it'll be a little bit quicker here. So as I mentioned, this is in its infancy. So right now we're only jointly facilitated by ATWG participants. And our main mission here is to identify practical applications of power flow control technology and reduce barriers to deployment. So that's really important, the reducing barriers, because we've had power flow control technologies like PARs and things like that for years, but why haven't they been implemented at a wider scale? Is there some challenges that we need to look at? Are there some reasons that, whether they're internal or external, that there's resistance to implementing power flow control on a wider scale? And we're going to look more specifically at improving transmission system and also distribution system capacity and hosting capacity to defer costly upgrades where possible, specifically where it applies to renewable energy, but also for high electrification of the grid. So some specific goals for 2023 for this group is to, do our process. Stage one here is review existing power flow control technologies, and again, understand the challenges that we need to overcome, whether they're operational, long-term planning, or something else like that. And also look at evaluating large-scale power flow control utilization in systems and figuring out what needs to be done to ensure coordinated operations. So you can imagine if you have a lot of power flow control devices on your system, pushing and pulling power from different directions, is there going to be some issues with that interplay between those? And what can we do to study those and make sure that the system remains reliable? And then lastly, we're going to inform our coordinated grid planning process planners of the best use cases for different types of power flow control technologies, and where to implement those, and what kind of needs are you seeing, and where can these devices be used to the greatest extent possible. So I'm just going to go over some of the ongoing projects and technologies that we've looked at so far. The first one is called a Smart Valve made by SmartWires. It's currently being studied by Central Hudson under a pilot, and I believe you're going to have commercial deployment in 2023 of this year. That's on their 345 kV system. And it's a really interesting device that's, it's called it's a switched modular static synchronous series compensator. So what that is it's a power electronics device that can effectively inject the voltage and make the line think that its impedance is different than what it would be when it's just the line, from a layman's point of view. We've also looked at there's a NYSEG pilot for what's called a switched source tie controller. This is a really interesting device that's on the distribution that can help increase hosting capacity for DER on different distribution lines. And this is really good for NYSEG system, because you can actually tie together different feeders at different voltage levels and push and pull power to kind of optimize the amount of DER we can fit on the grid, or even, you know, alleviate different types of constraints. And then I would be remiss not to mention, you know, we have PARs, these more traditional pieces of technology, phase angle regulators. These are used all over New York in certain situations. So we have some in Rochester for Avangrid. I know Con Ed's got some as well on the board of PJM. And then also series reactors and capacitors, which are not really smart devices. They're just whether switched in or switched out. Again, these change the impedance of the line and help push and pull power under different loading situations and generation situations. On top of these, we're going to do additional review focused on different types of power flow control that haven't been widely deployed within New York. So, you know, just to list some of these is distributed series compensators, unified power flow controllers, transformerless unified power flow controllers, and also possibly using back-to-back HVDC as a type of power flow control. So right now, those are really implemented for long distance generation and also tying together different interconnects. But, you know, maybe we can use those cost effectively as a power flow control type of device as well. So this is just a list of a couple of things we've done so far. You know, not too much, but we did have a presentation on the switch source tie controller pilot. Again, this type of device can increase feeder and substation posting capacity, also improve reliability on the distribution feeder, and also just do some voltage regulation. And by doing this, we can defer different system upgrades. Again, this is really good for a NYSEG system because sometimes we have lines that are at 12.5 kV right next to a line that's at 4.8 kV. And if being able to tie those together can really open up the possibilities to kind of get more generation on the local side. We also had a presentation on modular power flow control. This technology can actually really help reduce wind power curtailment. So these are automatic devices that can coordinate responses from multiple different locations, which improves cost savings and reduces congestion. And then EPRI, we had EPRI come in and do a pretty big survey on their power flow control technologies that they've been looking at across the country. So they showed us a couple of different power flow control technologies that fall under a range of the technology readiness levels and also different types of designs. And what they did, which was I thought was very interesting, and we kind of talked about with the DLR, was showing how these PFC systems can complement conventional transmission and traditional solutions through prioritizing flows through different lines. So maybe instead of having to rebuild or reconductor 10 transmission lines, we might only need to do 5 if we intelligently place these power flow control devices to push and pull power in different directions. And then they also did a high-level survey of different solutions and how they should be designed for different types of technology and the use cases that correlate with those device characteristics. Next slide, please. So again, we're going to try to run this power flow control task force through the 3-stage technology evaluation process. We're really just in stage 1 right now, the technology survey and screening. We kind of think that's going to be going until the end of Q2 this year, with possibly looking at technical and economic assessments coming in 2023. Our hope is that we'll be in that stage 3, the identifying locations and deployment of specific technologies and use cases by the time we're at stage 3 in the CGPP, so that we can kind of give another tool to the toolbox of the planners that are doing that coordinated grid planning process. The good news is there's already some mature power flow control technologies that they can use already, but there's definitely other things that we want to kind of standardize on within the ATWG and give those to the planners for use. So that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them as best I can.
Dave Rupert with Transverse. Chris, another interesting project, so congratulations on that. The transfer, you mentioned looking at the economics. What do you think the B2C ratio will ultimately be that you're looking for to say that this is something that the investment is going to give enough benefit. And by that, you know, I'm looking at 2030 and trying to get to some pretty high hurdles.
Yeah.
Is this gonna give enough with, and that's with DLRs too, right? POCs and DLRs. Okay, in that.
Yeah, I think that actually applies to most of these technologies that we talked about, but, you know, as far as power flow control specifically, it depends on the use case. One thing that we've done, and we actually got approval for a project in the Southern Tier Hornell area, to actually use the smart valve device that I mentioned. And the reason we saw a benefit to that device is because there was a small overload on a very, very, very long line. So it made more sense to just effectively increase the impedance a little bit of that line to bias flows away from it, rather than reconductoring 50 miles of the line. But on top of that, there's other considerations. You know, the reality is New York's got like the oldest grid in the country, in the world even. So, you know, it might make sense to put a power flow control device in, but then when you go out and you're like, oh, this line's, you know, has poor asset condition, it's going to be cheaper for the customers in the long run to rebuild it rather than put a power flow control device in. So those are some of the considerations we need to do when we look at not just power flow control, but all types of technologies.
Yeah, and that makes sense with that, with the smart valve, because you can do something quick and easy, but then in the southern tier with, you know, projections of renewables out in the west of you, that technology is eventually it's not gonna be able to do it, right? You're gonna have to reconductor or rebuild that line.
Yeah, and it's not just about, it's about deferment of investment as well. Like, we don't want to have to rebuild the whole grid at the exact time. So there is some value in deferring upgrades until such a time when there's actually resources open to actually construct that equipment.
And these devices will, even if you upgrade a line, these devices still can be utilized to increase throughput on them down the road.
Yeah, that's
So
a
I mean,
good thing
it's just
about
an
that.
add or two. If you keep adding more renewables, you can get this extra 30% or whatever you think you can get out of that line. To a new line, even more. So it's something that you won't just throw away.
Or redeploy the
Or redeploy it
Right.
somewhere else.
And that's something EPRI actually talked about in their presentation to us, was, you know,
Doesn't go
utilizing
away.
PFC as like a complement to traditional solutions, you know, your reconductors, your rebuilds, new transformers, things like that. Being able to complement what you have to actually get even more out of the system.
Yeah, the smart valve makes sense because you can redeploy that, plus you've got variance in there.
Right,
But
for
if you
sure.
put series capacitors or series reactors on, then you got a parasitic load and a.
Yeah, they're kind of dumb devices, so you know, it really helps with the smart valve being able to adjust how much effective impedance you're seeing on your line. So that's why we kind of thought about going with that type of device there.
And some of the value with that device, right, is it doesn't necessarily impact the protection on other terminals, right? Which is huge.
Any other questions in the room? Forrest?
Jason, we've got two questions from the chat. Both of them are from Maria Illich from MIT Smart Grids, and I'll just hit them one at a time. She tees up the first question by pointing out that today phase angle regulators are not optimized because of regulatory rules at the interfaces between the New York control area and its neighbors. The question is, are you going to look into how to align regulatory rules, presumably between control areas for power flow control?
So, I mean, we have a bar that's kind of on there as well that we were looking at, but
So I think this question would be, maybe the ISO could handle this one. This is the between control areas,
The
interchange,
internal
right?
controllable ties project is ongoing, I would say.
Say again?
The internal controllable tie lines project is the market project
Okay.
is ongoing.
and you know, PARs aren't just used for that too. We have some up in Rochester that are used to bias flows depending on how much generation is being output up there.
Yeah. And we have that variable frequency transformer that ties Linden into the city. You talk about crossing.
Maria's second question, maybe Andrew, this is back to you, is which software might be used for coordinating these?
I mean, that's something we gotta look into for sure. You know, I don't know, Eva, if EPRI has done, probably has done some research on that type of thing, but that's gonna be part of the task force's, goal. You know, all of these technologies is, what are the best modeling tools for each type of technology?
And I think it's fair to say for all the task forces in the ATWG in general, business case, business model, those kinds of issues are in play along with the technologies as we look at these, because we're trying to figure out how to push them into use more readily.
And we got a lab to test all that.
So
That's true, Agile might be really helpful
I'm saying.
for the coordination.
You got a lab to test it all out.
MIT might have something too. Any other questions for Chris? Okay. So are there any other questions in general for today before we wrap up? Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's Advanced Technology Working Group Technical Conference. Thanks to all the presenters and those who contributed to today's meeting from the ATWG. Again, the slides and the recording for today's meeting will be posted onto DMM on the DPS website under case number 20-E-0197. We hope to have that up. The recording usually takes a couple days to put together. We probably could put the slides up sooner than that, but probably the recording early next week, we're thinking. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.